This next part, there are no slides because I will just be showing you like a couple of fun things about CSS that will be extremely important for you as you sort of prepare yourself for this HTML CSS journey. If you'd like to sort of follow along as I do it, I'll be doing it inside of the Supreme Court HTML. But feel free to like take notes or however you want to do it. Basically, right, there have been a few questions that all of you have rightly asked, like, what if I just want to lay out one paragraph differently? Or what if, right, like, I want to add a byline, right, and I want that to look different, which is pretty normal. What do I do? So, in addition to being able to use any of these tags as something that you refer to in CSS, we all have the extreme power to name things whatever we want to in the HTML as well. So I'm actually going to just put a byline in here just to show you. So by CC way, the onion. So I'm just going to refresh. So I have a byline now, right? Mm-hmm. OK. And it's just like, it's also just another paragraph. So I don't need it to be an H something. It's not that important. But I want it to be different. I want it to say be italicized. So the way that we add a name to any HTML sort of chunk or tag on the page is that similar to like image has source, right? We do a space to indicate that we're about to do something. And then you say class equals, and then whatever name you want to name it. So in this case, I'm going to just name it byline. So this is the equivalent of me saying, for this P, I dub thee byline, right? Like, I'm naming you whatever I feel like, and your name is going to be byline, and sort of the syntax, right? This basically should say, like, name, but that's not the case, because class means something very specific. If we've given something a CSS class, is the same as we've named one of the HTML elements something, and that's the name is blank. That's what CSS classes means. I'll expand on sort of how far this can go in a second, but the question is, okay, sure, I've named it. How do I use it in the CSS, right?
Make sure byline is in quotes.
Mm-hmm, yes, make sure it's in quotes, because we're naming it something in the same way that source equals is in a quote. Doesn't matter if there's spaces or not in there, like we're putting it in quotes. And then whatever you name it, keep it to one word for now. Because 2 words will be tricky and full of surprises. OK, so over here, the way that we refer to any sort of HTML tag is by naming the tag. The way that we refer to a class, right, you'd think maybe like I could just write byline. But you can tell by the fact that this is in white that Sublime is like, not quite right. Mm-hmm. The way that we indicate this is a name that we have given, that it is a CSS class, is by putting a period in front of it. Mm-hmm. So period means look in the HTML document for a class that's named whatever I write behind the period. And there's no space. So it's period and then the name that you gave. So in this case, it's period byline. Okay. So here, right, does anybody by any chance know how I make something italic using CSS? M is the HTML tag that does it. Font style. Italic. Yeah. So now when I go back here, by CC way the onion is in italics and nothing else. OK. So let's get like a little fancy, right? You know, sometimes in articles, like the first 2 paragraphs have bigger text than everybody else, because we have like our fancy article layout. All right. So Washington, D.C. and Justice Anthony Kennedy, these 2 paragraphs. Let's say I want them to have the exact same behavior. What you can actually do is name them both the exact same thing. So if I say class, then I name it like big text. And again, in this case, CSS classes cannot be 2 separate words. If you want to use 2 words, that's fine. Just make sure you put a hyphen in between them. I'll show you in a second what happens when we use 2 words. But I'm going to just type literally the exact same name into both of these classes, both of these p tags. Big text. Okay.
And then when you close it, you don't have to put like class.
Right. Basically, the way that closing works is like CSS is literally just like layers of an onion, right? So you open something, and then as long as you close the HTML part of it, it doesn't care about all the other attributes that you put in there. It'll just close the first thing that matches. OK, so we've got big text. So I'm going to go over here and change this to say big text. So period, big, hyphen text, right? And then I'm going to make it bigger. So font size, let's say like 18. And then let's make the line height bigger too, like 20. OK, so I'm just like arbitrary making some decisions here. Fresh.
Does line height also have px?
Yes. If you leave these out, it will also work. It's just like you let it interpret what you mean. And so it's nice to be a little more specific. Also, that wasn't as dramatic as I wanted it to be.
No, nothing changed.
Yeah.
So it changed like a tiny bit. But there. So now I've changed it to 25 and 30. So now it's like way bigger. I can also, I'm a little zoomed in for your benefit, but that's how it looks now.
Can you go back to the sheet?
OK. So not only can you name any CSS element anything you want, or any HTML tag anything that you want, you can also name multiple things the same thing. And that way, right, if you want the style to always be the same for those things, you can do that. And you can do that across HTML tags. So what I mean is, if instead of 2 p tags, I wanted, say, this h4 to have those styles, I can do that too. It doesn't matter what the HTML tag is. Once you name it, you style them all simultaneously in the CSS. Or you can style them all simultaneously in the CSS. So if I save that, what happens here, right, is adapted from the onion gets bigger. All of the rules that I applied for it for H4 still apply. So for example, up here in H4, we said font family Georgia, text align center. That still applies because it's still in H4. But it also has this name called big text, right? It has this class. And so then on top of these two things, it also applies a font size of 25 and a line height of 30. So they build on top of each other. So then the question becomes, what happens if they conflict? What happens if the rules conflict, right? So I'm just going to make this super easy. This color will be red, and this color will be blue. Which, do you think it's going to be red or blue?
Blue.
Blue? Does everybody agree? Does anyone think that it'll be red?
Is the last command the one that matters?
Since you're making it, I think it'll be blue because you're specifying something for something specific. So you're explicitly telling me something.
You said they did it in order.
Both of these things are true.
Then I'm going to guess it's red with here.
Right. So it is blue, right? There's a few reasons why it's blue. So if, let's say I am not using this at all, right? So I'm going to comment it out. I use the same shortcut as earlier, command slash. In CSS, the way that you write a comment is the slash star and then star slash. You can do it on one line if you want, right? Like, whoops. This is a CSS comment. And I always add my requisite spaces. But OK, let's pretend that I don't have this name on there right now. And I have another H4. And I say color blue. In this case, it will still be blue, right? Because it does just go in order. Ta-da, right? It doesn't have all that other stuff I added to it, but it's still blue.
Why doesn't it have all the other stuff?
Because I hid it in this comment. Yeah, so I'm not using it right now. So it's still blue because that's the order it goes in. And you can do it like this, right? Like you can have the same thing referred to again. Nothing will break. It'll just be like, OK, like we're back to referring to H4 again. That works. Similarly, right, This is what I talked about earlier. If it was like that, it would be blue. Because again, it's just the order top down. Now, here's the fun part. Big text, I'm going to move it to be right on top of it. And the color is still going to be blue because of what Andrew said earlier, because it's more specific. So if I refresh, it's still blue. And that's because H4 is an HTML tag, right? And that's as generic as you can go. One step closer is an HTML, or sorry, a CSS class name, right? So that's just one step closer. Does this make sense to everybody so far, right? One thing is just, I've given it a name, and so it's a little more specific than a generic sort of person. My name is CC, right? You can even get more specific than that if you want, which is here, right? We've said there's a P that has a name big class. There's also an H4, or sorry, big text. There's also an H4 that has the class big text. What I can do is combine those things together if I wanted. And I could actually say P dot big text, meaning if it's both a P and has the class name big text, do something else. And so here, if I say color purple, it will change one but not the other, right? So this is now purple, this is now blue. And it's basically whatever is most specific that overrules everything else. And then if you have something that is the same level of specific, so let's say I did this again down here, and I said color black, because this is the same level of specificity, then whatever is later will be the one that's used. So now it should go back to being black. Okay. Does that concept make sense? It's very rare that you need to dig through all these layers. Usually if you name it something, that's good enough. And then if you want something else to be different, I would just name it something else. I wouldn't overwrite myself over and over. But sometimes when you're building a very large site with a lot of elements, let's say I want all the buttons across ProPublica to look identical. But when we do a project, we want to give it a special color to match the rest of the project or something, right? Then I could say P dot button or something and make it something special. Or I could give it an additional name and use that instead. Okay, so before I move on to the next, there's one more twist. Before I move there, does this make sense to everybody? Does anyone want me to go over anything again?
The only thing on mine, I was following along, but my adapted from the onion is still red.
Adapted from the onion. Oh, is your adapted from the onion in H4?
Yes.
Okay. It's still red. Does it say H4 class equals big text in the HTML?
No, on H4 now.
Okay. So that's the difference.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I added the same named class to two different types of HTML elements to show you that you can. I don't normally do that, but it's it's like the Wild West in here for CSS. You can do whatever you want. This is just how it affects everything.
So when you do P dot big text, it's only affecting that paragraph.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if I got rid of big text as a CSS property entirely, and only the only time I refer to it is p dot big text. Here, I'll get rid of this black one too, so you can tell that there's a difference. What happens is, right, it works in one place but not the other. So here it's still purple, but then up here nothing is different. Yeah. Okay. Are we ready for one last twist? Okay. Just as we all, as people, have multiple names, HTML elements can also have multiple names. So this is why earlier I told you not to put any spaces in your class names, because what happens is if I do byline space special, it means that this paragraph tag has two names. One is byline and one is special, and I can write them as if they were totally separate. So here, let's go to my byline. I can have another thing that says dot special, right? And I can give it like special font or something. Do I have to say Comic Sans? Guessing I do. Oh, it didn't work.
I don't know if it has to.
Maybe it's,
comic.
yeah, maybe it's just Comic.
I've already tried that.
No.
Thank God.
Comic Sans CSS. Oh yeah, it's Comic Sans MS. Just options, man. Right, I knew it has like some weird name. Comic Sans MS. There we go. Right? This is why tomorrow you'll teach them design and they won't make web pages that look like this. Okay, so one dictates the style of the font and the other one dictates the fact that it's italic, right? Normally, if that was my goal, I would name it one thing and put both of those in the same deal. But sometimes sort of you are designing an entire website and so you want different things to match, and it's helpful to give something multiple classes. One way that that makes sense is sometimes like once we get into JavaScript, we'll want things to have classes just for like a temporary amount of time. And so we might give something a class that's like show and then hide or something when we want to like hide and show things. And the only, like you can use JavaScript to add and remove names from different elements. And so when it's removed, all the CSS goes away. And when you put it in, all the CSS comes back. And that's sort of one way of accomplishing stuff like this. So you can give a piece of HTML as many names as you want. You can go forever. I don't recommend that because it'll get really confusing really quickly, but you can. And when they have multiple names, those two names are treated as if they're the same level of specificity. Okay. Okay.
So you get the same thing as the dot byline.
Mm-hmm.
Dot byline.
Yeah. So if I did this here and replaced it, and I refresh, it's still Comic Sans.
Can you go back to the HTML?
Mm-hmm. Or this, right?
No,
This?
what do you call the second class?
Oh, yeah. So there's just a space. Yeah. So space denotes it's a new class name now, and that you can't write something in the CSS that looks like this. You can't write dot byline special. Like, it won't make any sense. Does anyone have an idea if I want to say in the CSS, I want the thing that is named byline and named special? Do you have any ideas how I could put that together, just logically, based on what I've showed you already? So the question is, if in the CSS I want to specify, I want the thing that is named both byline and special, what would I do here to make that work? Any ideas?
Plus sign.
That's a good idea.
Another dot.
Another dot. Yeah. So check this out. So if I do that, dot byline dot special, it's like I'm chaining them together. Name byline, name special, same thing. Yeah. Again, I don't expect you to have to like go this far. There's actually like another level of the rabbit hole that we're just not even going to go to. But that is why CSS cascades. There's sort of just many levels of specificity. And sort of the way to think about it is sort of the bigger website that you have to run, the more CSS you end up writing. And maybe like for ProPublica, right, all of our projects look kind of the same. There's special designs, but you can tell it's the same brand. And it's because oftentimes we have like a master CSS file that everything uses, and then we break the rules, but we have them all on the page too, right? And so being more specific comes into play when you're working in that kind of framework. But if you're just making a website for yourself, like your portfolios, like if you get this far, like you were just thinking about it in a very complicated way, and you can probably simplify like right away. Yeah. Okay. So the last thing I want to do here is sort of prove to you how this works, because the browser can tell, and I'll show you sort of in here. Adapted from the onion, you see here in the CSS what's going on. See, it can tell color blue and it can tell color red, but it's crossed this one out because it understands that this is more specific, so that's the one it's going to use. And so if you chain these, you'll just see a bunch of them crossed out. Because it reads the CSS and then it knows, oh, never mind, not doing that one, doing this one now. And so if you ever write CSS and you're like, I swear the code is right, why isn't it showing up? Sometimes you can inspect in the browser and you'll be like, oh, it's because this class is overwriting this one. And then you know either to take it out or to move it or to name it something new. Any questions about CSS classes and or specificity? Yeah, it's an interesting concept. Okay. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to do now, because, or I'm going to tell you about the homework, and then I'm going to show you a few more tricks inside the web inspector that just generally help as you are now writing both HTML and CSS. If you're just writing HTML, the web inspector is kind of useless because just HTML doesn't do that many fun things on its own. But to help you for your homework, what we're basically going to do for the homework is I've given you another HTML page, right? And on its own, it looks like this, right? So it's kind of like evokes this idea that maybe it's a tweet, but it's just all the text that goes into a tweet. What you're going to do is you're going to change the CSS only. So you can't change the HTML at all. That's sort of part of the exercise. And you want it to look like this in the end. And I don't think there's anything quirky in here. This is just a picture. It doesn't have to have like a black background, and the whole thing doesn't have to be centered. But the actual picture itself, I want you to make it that width, right? And I want you to sort of like, just notice all of the little things that are different about this versus what currently shows up, and just write CSS to make it look just like this. Okay, so in order to do that, what's really nice is to have immediate feedback as you're playing around with stuff. Because what I'm not telling you is like, how wide should it be, right? I'm not giving you a pixel value, and it's really annoying to say like 100, save, refresh, go back. 120, save, refresh, go back, right? It's just an aggravating process that you don't have to go through. So what's really great about this sort of inspect element option here is that it allows you to live try things out. And once you're happy with it, copy and paste it back into your CSS. So from this, right, I'm actually going to just, for a second here, move everything to not center. And the way I can do that here is I can just uncheck sort of some of the properties, and it will temporarily just get rid of them. If I were to refresh, they would come back. But from here, right, I'm just going to uncheck some of this. OK. So I moved everything back to the left because I want to try something here, right, that's like a little clue into the homework, which is width. So there's a body tag that we put everything in. Don't forget that that's also a tag, an HTML tag that you can style, that you can name, that you can do things with. It literally applies to like the entire page simultaneously. Not all the elements in it, but just the whole page. But what we can do here, right, is add a style. So all I did here is I scrolled up to the very top, and Chrome does this helpful thing where it just says like element.style. It's like, here's a blank template if you want to try out a new thing. And so I just go in, and I can change the width of the entire body to say like 400 pixels, right? And what happens is it like squishes everything. Now, to help us really see it, I can do background color, let's say like light blue. Oh, that didn't really help you see it, did it? OK, I'm going to do something real quick. Border, 2 pixels. OK. You don't have to know how to do that part. We'll talk about that a lot tomorrow. But I now have a border. Now it's 400 pixels. And now let's say like that's too narrow, right? Like maybe the picture that I provided is wider than that. You can actually push up on your keyboard, and it'll go up 1 pixel at a time. And it'll just move it in the inspector so you can see literally what that is. You can also hold Shift and push up, and it'll move it 10 pixels up at a time. You can also go 10 pixels down at a time. You can also literally type any number that you want in here. Like maybe I'm not 100 off, maybe I'm like really off, right? And I'm like, oh, 600 is not big enough. Maybe it's 1,000, right? So you can sort of just get live feedback using this right here, as opposed to trying it out in your file, refreshing, trying it out in your file, refreshing.
So you have to designate that it's solid blue.
Oh yeah, for the border. for the border. I'm going to talk about literally how borders work tomorrow, because there's sort of 3 things going on simultaneously. But I'm adding it on so you guys can see the width of what I've made. The other thing is, if there's already a CSS class that you've written, right, you can just write it in here. So currently for byline, which is here by CC with Onion, I have like it defined multiple times. To add something to something like this, you just click right underneath, like whatever the last property is, and it'll just open up a blank thing. And so if I want to try it out as bigger, I can do font size 20, right? I could do the same thing. I can push up to go up 1 at a time, shift up to go up by 10 at a time. But yeah. So when you're sort of like finicking around with stuff like that, it's really quite easy to use to help you out. The last thing is that if you want to use like a color that's part of a picture on the page, you can use the color picker to do that as well. The last like power move, right? So by CC Way, let's say I just do color red, just because I want this box to show up. If I click on it, right, I can pick stuff here, or I can click on this little eyedrop tool, click on it. Oh, sorry, I just toggled it off. Click on it so that it's blue, and then I can actually go onto the page and pick any color that I want. So I can pick the sky blue in this picture. I could also pick like this blue that I defined myself. But as soon as I pick one, it'll give you the actual hex value of that color. For the purposes of our assignment, you don't have to be this specific. You don't have to pick the exact same colors that I did. But I'm just showing this to you because oftentimes when you're designing a page and you have beautiful photography, you often want to pick the same color that's in there to match the color scheme.
Where is the color picker?
Yeah, so the color picker is like any time that you write color, colon, whatever, once you do that, a little box of that color will show up. And when you click on that box is how you trigger the color picker. So sometimes you just give it a color so that you can use it.
Can you save your work that you've done in this temporary version of the?
You cannot.
You can, so, but you could like copy and paste it.
Right. So like what you can do, right, just to show you, it understands, like Google understands that you're doing this. And so it doesn't fill your copy and paste board with like random crap. And so if I copy this right now, Control C, and I come out here and I just paste it, it's just that part. There's no like checkboxes or whatever that come with. They get rid of all the other formatting.
Don't work too long before you copy and paste over, because it's easy to just be like, I'm going to make all my changes, and then you forget some, and then you refresh, and they're all gone.
Yeah, and they're all gone. Or you accidentally click on a link, and then they're all gone.
You do it every couple of changes.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff that you can do in here, but for now, the default is left as HTML, right as CSS, and that's all you really have to do. Yeah. And then if you guys haven't figured it out already, right, if you go to anybody's website and you want to change the text, you just double click on the text in here on the left. You can change it to whatever you want. So like, Lena is sitting next to me. And then it just changes it.
So would we just like copy paste like the changes we need here?
In the HTML or in the CSS or both? So when you're writing CSS, I recommend just copy and pasting the changes you make here once you like them and put them in your CSS. Just know like which part you're putting it into, right? Like this applies to H1, so you copy this part and you paste it into your H1 section. For the HTML, I would recommend making content changes like in the actual HTML because you're writing text. So unless you're trying to like fit it into a space, which this is helpful for, most of the time you don't need to edit the text in this view. Yeah. Any other questions?
There was something you said earlier about CSS where like you can leave some things blank and it'll forgive you for that, but too many and then it creates a problem.
Oh, right. That was what I was talking about for HTML specifically. If I did this, if I was like, I'm going to make an opening P class, so paragraph 1, and then make another one, paragraph 2, and I just never close them, right? It will actually be smart enough to put them out separately. And it's because the browser is so smart that when you inspect, it's secretly closing them for you, right? Like when you look, it's adding this closed P. And it's because the browsers are getting like smarter and being more forgiving. But let's say you have this problem and you're trying to do something else. Basically what happens is like your paragraphs might never break, but they might all suddenly like, have the same styles or something like that. And what's happening then is you're like 2 steps removed from what's actually wrong with the problem. And at that point, it just becomes much harder to troubleshoot what's going on. And so I generally recommend like anytime you can remember to sort of like write the syntax correctly to do that, because then you never have to worry about that triggering like a chain event of problems. Yeah.
Does the other part of the homework apply as well to tonight?
Yeah, let me look. So, oh yes, okay. So this second part, good question. So what I would do is you've all gathered your like sort of bio about information. I would go through and just mark it up with HTML. So I wouldn't worry too much about the CSS because you're not learning enough to have laid out a page yet. But to mark it up with like, these are paragraphs, these are lists, this is an H1, this is the most important thing. Just get that structure ready for that when you are ready for the CSS and when we start laying things out, you can do that without needing to go back and go through all your HTML. So with that, I would just think about hierarchy of all of your elements. And then let's say like oftentimes for a portfolio, right? Everything has an image, maybe, but everything has a name. Everything has a link. You know ahead of time that you're probably going to design it so that all of the links look the same. So if those are the only links you have on the page, that's fine. But if that's not, then give all those links the same class name. So you're sort of just thinking about the structure of your website for now. And then you'll obviously be able to change it as we learn CSS, but it'll just save you a little time. Otherwise, I think that's it.